Do we know definitively the result here? Do you think if viewers are doing business in Poland, interested in the Polish story, they assume that we have another 5 years or so of Andrzej Duda? And if so, what does that look like?
And as you just said, this was a very close call. And yesterday, the exit poll was not decisive, but I'm sure that today we already know who won the elections, since the difference between the two is less than the number of people who were not counted yet. This was a very long election campaign and a short night, but it was quite expected that Andrzej Duda will maintain his position, and it's quite sure that the next term will be much more difficult than the previous one, as the economy is likely to face strong economic headwinds. Actually, both candidates were casting spells on the economic situation and fiscal leeway, or its lack, that Poland has, and both were quite generous in their electoral promises, which will quite surely won't be materialized over next say 2 years. The expected deficit in Poland is around 10%, and only in the beginning of February the government planned zero deficits. So the situation has changed quite significantly.
Yes. And do you think that the coronavirus and the government's handling of it had an impact on the result here?
I think that still there are a lot of uncertainties around the second wave of the pandemic and further economic consequences, but it's quite sure that Poland, that the prudence threshold of 55% entrenched in the Polish constitution is looming quite fast. So the government will likely have its hands tight over the next years. And what is important, that actually the popularity success of the current government hinged on a very good economic situation and increased revenue from tax compliance, which is further unlikely to happen.
And in looking back at some of the issues that were highlighted during the campaign, a sort of culture war seems to be fairly evident within Poland and then also between the Polish government and Brussels. Do you see that culture war will continue?
I think that we might expect a little bit of change in the rhetoric. Also, keep in mind in the debate around the rule of law and potential impacts on the rule of law on the recovery fund that is currently being discussed. So I think that the government, facing the difficult and strong economic headwinds, might need to change its rhetoric over next months and years.
Okay, so you think that because the government will want access to the recovery fund, it might have to allow more judicial independence?
I think that some of the changes might be postponed.
I apologise. It seems as if we may have lost Dr. Poniatowski. Oh, you're still there, Greg. Sorry.
Yes,
sorry.
I'm here.
Sorry, I was just asking you, Greg, whether you think that we will see a change in attitude around the independence of the judiciary then in Poland.
I may think that the pace of changes in the judiciary may slow down, as you said, because of the recovery fund, economic consequences, and the push from the EU. But still, there is a lot of uncertainties around that.
Okay. Thanks very much. What about those tensions, though, between Brussels and Warsaw? Dr. Poniatowski, do you think then that we won't see as much of that in this second term for Andrzej Duda?
I may expect that the second term of President Duda will be slightly different, as during the first term, Andrzej Duda needed to also to maintain support of the ruling camp. In the second term, I think things might slightly change, and also the attitude and the rhetoric towards Brussels may slightly change.